There is a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from running too fast or sleeping too little. It comes from staying, from waking up every single morning and choosing, often without even realizing it, to remain in a place, a relationship, a job, or a version of yourself that quietly empties you. And what makes this exhaustion so uniquely painful is that somewhere deep inside, you already know. You know that something isn't right. You know that you are giving more than you are receiving. You know that you are surviving rather than living. And yet, you stay. Today, we are going to talk about why. Not to judge that choice, but to understand it. Because when we understand why we stay, we finally gain the power to choose differently. The first thing to understand is that staying in draining situations is rarely about weakness. It is, in fact, often a sign of how deeply wired we are for survival and connection. Human beings are not designed to walk away easily. We are social creatures, and our nervous systems were built to seek safety and familiarity, even when that familiarity hurts us. Psychologists call this phenomenon the status quo bias, the deeply ingrained tendency to prefer what is known over what is uncertain. The brain, at its most primal level, interprets the familiar as safe, even when the familiar is slowly suffocating you. Change, even positive change, registers as a threat. And so, the mind does what it was always meant to do. It protects you by keeping you still. But the status quo bias is only part of the story. To truly understand why we stay, we have to go back further. We have to go back to childhood. Many of the patterns that keep us locked in draining situations were written long before we were old enough to question them. Children who grew up in environments where love was inconsistent, where affection had to be earned, or where chaos was the norm, often develop what psychologists call an insecure attachment style. They learn at a very early age that love is not something stable. It is something you have to work for, something you have to endure difficulty to deserve. And so, as adults, these individuals find themselves unconsciously recreating those same environments, not because they enjoy the pain, but because the pain feels like home. Think about that for a moment. Think about the person who stays in a relationship where they feel perpetually undervalued, yet leaves the moment someone treats them with consistent kindness, or the professional who thrives under a demanding, thankless boss but feels uncomfortable in a supportive workplace. This is not coincidence. This is the blueprint being followed. The one written in childhood, reinforced by experience, and mistaken for identity. And then there is the psychological principle that may be the most quietly devastating of all, the sunk cost fallacy. This is the belief that because we have already invested so much, whether time, energy, emotion, or years of our life, leaving would mean that all of it was wasted. We tell ourselves, I have put 5 years into this relationship, I cannot walk away now. Or, I have worked at this company for a decade, leaving would make all of that meaningless. But here is the truth that the sunk cost fallacy does not want you to hear. The years you have already spent are gone regardless of what you choose next. The only thing you can actually control is what you do with the time that remains. Staying in something that drains you does not honor the past. It only sacrifices the future. There is also something deeply important to understand about the role of identity in keeping us stuck. Over time, we begin to merge with the situations we inhabit. The draining relationship becomes part of how we see ourselves. The exhausting job becomes the answer we give when someone asks who we are. The toxic friendship becomes the social world we have built our routine around. Leaving stops feeling like a decision. It starts feeling like a decision of self. Who am I if I am not the person who is trying to fix this relationship? What do I do with myself if I am not grinding through this career? These questions are terrifying, and the mind, once again, responds to terror by choosing stillness. There is a term in psychology called learned helplessness. First studied by psychologist Martin Seligman, it describes what happens when a person experiences repeated situations in which their efforts do not lead to change. Over time, they stop trying, not because they are lazy or without ambition, but because their nervous system has drawn a conclusion from the evidence it has been given. Nothing I do will make a difference, so why try? This is how people end up enduring draining situations for years without ever making a move, not because they lack the desire for something better, but because some part of them has quietly concluded that something better is not available to them, that they are not the kind of person who gets to leave, that they are not the kind of person who deserves more. And this brings us to perhaps the deepest layer of all, self-worth. At the very core of why we stay is often a belief, usually unspoken and even unconscious, that we are not worthy of ease, that comfort must be suspicious, that if something feels good and nourishing and right, it probably will not last, so it is safer not to get used to it. People who struggle with low self-worth often do not recognize draining situations as draining. They recognize them as normal. The bar for what they will accept has been set so low by past experience that genuine kindness feels unfamiliar, even untrustworthy. If any of this resonates with you, I want you to hear something important. The fact that you stayed does not mean you are broken. It means you are human, and it means you were doing the best you could with the tools you had at the time. But awareness is a tool too, and now you have it. Now you can begin to ask the questions that change everything. Not why can't I just leave, but rather what belief is making staying feel safer than going. Not what is wrong with me, but what am I protecting, and is that protection still serving me? The work of change does not always look dramatic. It rarely does. It begins quietly in the small moments where you choose to notice how something makes you feel rather than immediately dismissing that feeling. It lives in the practice of sitting with discomfort long enough to understand it, rather than escape into the familiar. It grows when you start to separate your identity from your circumstances and remember that you are not the relationship, the job, the role, or the struggle. You are the person inside all of those things, and that person has always had more options than fear allowed them to see. Healing from the pattern of staying does not require you to suddenly become fearless. It only requires you to become curious about your patterns, compassionate toward your history, and open to the possibility that a life that nourishes you is not a fantasy. It is something you are allowed to build. One courageous, imperfect, beautiful choice at a time. You have already done the hard part. You have stayed through so much. Now, with the same quiet strength that kept you enduring, you can begin the far more powerful work of learning what it means to truly stay for yourself.